The scream tore from her throat as his hand slammed into her back, and then there was nothing but freezing air and the shrieking wind as Julia Nolan tumbled from the moving train into the white abyss below. The world spun in a kaleidoscope of snow and darkness, her body striking the frozen ground with a sickening crack that sent lightning bolts of agony through every nerve. She lay crumpled in the drift, her green traveling dress already soaking through with icy water, unable to move as the train's whistle grew fainter in the distance. Blood seeped warm against her temple before freezing to her skin, and somewhere in the cottony haze of shock, she understood that her husband had just tried to kill her. The December wind howled across the northern Arizona high country, burying her slowly in fresh powder. Julia's fingers twitched, the only movement she could manage as consciousness flickered like a dying candle. She had known Richard was cruel, had felt the sting of his palm across her cheek more times than she could count in their 2 years of marriage. But this was different. This was murder, calculated and cold, timed perfectly as they crossed through the most desolate stretch between Flagstaff and Ashfork. No witnesses on this freight line, just empty white wilderness stretching in every direction. Her vision dimmed as the cold seeped deeper into her bones. She was 23 years old, and she was going to die alone in the snow because she had discovered her husband's embezzlement scheme and threatened to turn him in to the authorities. The irony was not lost on her, even as hypothermia began its deadly work. She had married Richard Pemberton thinking he would give her stability after her father's death, never imagining that his respectable Chicago banking position was built on lies and stolen money. The darkness was almost welcoming when she heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats muffled by snow. Her eyelids were too heavy to open, her body too broken to respond, but some small part of her consciousness registered that someone was coming. The hoofbeats grew closer, then stopped. Heavy boots crunched through the snow near her head. Jesus Christ, a male voice breathed, rough with shock and something else, something that sounded almost like anguish. Madam? Madam, can you hear me? Strong hands touched her throat, feeling for a pulse, then moved carefully along her limbs. Julia managed the smallest whimper of pain, and the hands immediately gentled. I've got you, the voice said, closer now, urgent. You're going to be all right. I swear to God I'm going to make sure you're all right. She felt herself being lifted with extraordinary care, cradled against a solid chest that smelled of leather and wood smoke and horse. The pain was excruciating, and she must have cried out because the man holding her murmured apologies in a low, soothing tone as he carried her through the snow. There was the creak of saddle leather, the warmth of a horse's body. And then they were moving. Julia drifted in and out of awareness, catching fragments the man's arm tight around her waist, holding her secure against him in the saddle, his voice talking steadily as if the sound alone could keep her tethered to life. Stay with me now. My cabin's not far. I've got a good fire going. Warm blankets. You're going to make it. Just hold on. Time became meaningless. There was only the rhythmic gait of the horse, the man's warmth at her back, and the gathering darkness. When next she surfaced toward consciousness, she was being carried again, this time into blessed warmth. The heat of a fire touched her frozen skin, and she whimpered as the temperature change sent needles of sensation through her numb extremities. I know it hurts, the voice said, and there was such genuine compassion in it that tears leaked from beneath her closed eyelids. That's actually a good sign. Means you've got feelings still. She was lowered onto something soft, a bed or cot, and then careful hands were removing her wet clothing. Under different circumstances, she might have protested, but survival overrode modesty. The man worked with brisk efficiency, his touch impersonal despite the intimacy of the task, and soon she was wrapped in thick, dry blankets. Something warm was pressed to her lips. Try to drink, he urged. Just a little. The liquid was some kind of broth, salty and hot, and her body responded instinctively, swallowing. After a few sips, he pulled back. That's good. That's real good. Now you just rest. I need to check your injuries. And this might hurt, but I have to know what we're dealing with. His hands moved over her with practiced competence, and Julia realized through her haze that this was not a man unfamiliar with treating wounds. When he touched her left arm, the pain was so intense that blackness rushed up to claim her again. She woke to gray light filtering through a small window and the sound of someone moving quietly nearby. Every part of her body hurt with a deep, bone-level ache that made even breathing difficult. Julia forced her eyes open and found herself staring at rough-hewn log walls, a stone fireplace with a crackling fire, and sparse but tidy furnishings that spoke of a bachelor's dwelling. Her left arm was splinted and bound tight against her chest. Bandages wrapped her ribs and her head. "You're awake!" The voice from last night came from her left, and Julia turned her head carefully to see the man who had saved her life. He was standing beside a small stove, pouring coffee from a battered pot, and even in her battered state, Julia could not help but notice that he was striking. Tall and lean, with broad shoulders that filled out his faded flannel shirt, he moved with an easy grace that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. His hair was dark, almost black, and worn longer than was fashionable back east, curling slightly at his collar. When he turned to face her fully, she saw that his eyes were an unusual shade of gray-blue, set in a face that was all hard angles and weathered tan, a face that had spent years under the western sun. He looked to be perhaps 28 or 30, with the kind of rugged handsomeness that came from living close to the land. A shadow of stubble darkened his strong jaw, and there was a scar, faint and old, cutting through his left eyebrow. "How do you feel?" he asked, crossing to her side with a cup in his hand. Julia tried to speak and found her throat too dry. He seemed to anticipate this, setting the coffee aside and reaching for a ladle of water instead. He slipped an arm behind her shoulders, supporting her with surprising gentleness as he helped her drink. "Slow," he cautioned. "Not too much at once." When she had taken enough, he eased her back down. Julia found her voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Thank you." His expression softened. "No need for thanks. I'm just glad I found you when I did. Another hour out there and—" He shook his head, leaving the grim thought unfinished. "I'm Nathan Xavier. This is my cabin, about 6 miles northeast of Ashfork. Julia," she managed. "Julia Nolan." She used her maiden name without thinking, the name Pemberton feeling like poison on her tongue. "Well, Miss Nolan, you've got a broken arm. 3 cracked ribs that I can tell, likely more bruising than that, and you took a good knock to the head. You're lucky nothing worse broke in that fall." His eyes searched her face, and there was a question in them, one he seemed hesitant to ask. "The train you fell from, that was the 11:15 freight line. There's not supposed to be passengers on that run." Julia felt tears prick her eyes. The horror of it came rushing back, Richard's hands on her back, the moment of weightless terror, the impact. She turned her face away, unable to meet Nathan's gaze. "Hey now," he said quietly, and his hand touched her uninjured one, his calloused fingers warm and steady. "You don't have to talk about it, not yet. Right now, you just need to heal." But the words came anyway, spilling out in a broken whisper. "He pushed me. My husband pushed me from the train." The silence that followed was heavy. When she finally dared to look at Nathan again, his expression had gone hard as granite, a muscle ticking in his jaw. But when he spoke, his voice remained gentle. "You're safe here. I give you my word on that. Whatever happened, whoever did this to you, they can't touch you here." Julia wanted to believe him, but fear was a living thing in her chest. "He'll come looking for me. When he realizes I survived, then he'll have to go through me," Nathan said, and there was such quiet certainty in his voice that some of Julia's panic eased. "Rest now. You're safe. I promise you." Over the next few days, Julia learned that Nathan Xavier was a man of his word. He tended her injuries with a competence that surprised her until he explained that he had served as a cavalry scout for 3 years before mustering out and claiming this piece of land under the Homestead Act. He had learned field medicine out of necessity, he said, and Julia was grateful for every skill he possessed. He was patient beyond measure, helping her with tasks that mortified her, emptying the chamber pot, washing her face and hands, spooning broth into her mouth when her injuries made it too difficult to manage herself. Through it all, he maintained a respectful distance, his manner matter of fact, and never once making her feel ashamed of her helplessness. I've got two older sisters, he told her one evening, as he changed the bandage on her head wound. Grew up helping my mother take care of them when they were sick. This is nothing I have not seen before. Where are they now? Julia asked. Your family? Sisters are both married, living in Kansas. My mother passed 5 years back, and my father 2 years before her. It's just me now. There was no self-pity in his voice, just simple statement of fact. Is that why you came west? Nathan was quiet for a moment, his fingers gentle as they worked. Partly, I wanted land of my own, a place that was mine. The cavalry gave me a chance to see the territory, and when my enlistment was up, I knew this was where I wanted to be. He secured the fresh bandage and sat back. It's a hard life, but it's honest. And it's beautiful country, despite what it might seem like in winter. Julia found herself wanting to know more. This man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. Do you ranch? Farm? Cattle mostly. I've got about 30 head right now, though half of them are out on winter range. I work part-time as a scout and tracker for the territorial marshal too, which is how I happened to be out riding that day. There had been reports of rustlers in the area, and I was checking for signs. He met her eyes. I thank God I was out there. I thank God I found you. The sincerity in his voice made Julia's throat tight with emotion. I thought I was going to die out there. I thought no one would ever find me. But I did find you, Nathan said quietly. And you're going to be all right. You're stronger than you know, Julia Nolan. As the days passed into weeks, Julia's body began to heal. The headaches lessened, the bruises faded from purple to yellow-green, and she regained enough strength to sit up on her own. Nathan fashioned a sling for her broken arm that allowed her more mobility, and she began to move around the cabin, testing her limits. It was a small space, just one main room that served as kitchen, living area, and bedroom, with a lean-to attached to the back where Nathan kept his horse and supplies. But it was clean and well organized. Everything in its place. Nathan had moved his own bedroll to the floor near the fireplace, insisting that Julia keep the bed, and she felt guilty every time she saw him stretching out the kinks in his back each morning. You should take the bed, she protested one evening. It's your home. I cannot keep displacing you. You've got broken ribs and a broken arm, Nathan replied, not looking up from the saddle leather he was oiling. You need the bed more than I do. I've slept in worse places than a floor by a warm fire, believe me. Julia watched him work, noting the sure movements of his hands, the concentration on his face. In the firelight, his features seemed softer, less harsh, though no less handsome. She found herself thinking about him more than was probably proper, wondering about his life before she had stumbled into it, imagining what it must be like to be so self-sufficient and capable. Nathan, she said quietly, and he looked up. I need to tell you everything. You deserve to know what you've gotten yourself into by helping me. He set aside the leather and gave her his full attention. All right, I'm listening. And so Julia told him the whole sordid story. She spoke of her father's death from pneumonia 3 years earlier, leaving her alone with a small inheritance and no close family. She described how Richard Pemberton had come into her life, charming, sophisticated, promising security and stability. How she had married him after a brief courtship, moved to Chicago, and slowly begun to notice the discrepancies. Money that appeared from nowhere, late-night meetings with unsavory characters, his increasing irritability and violence when she asked questions. I found ledgers, she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, hidden in his study. He had been embezzling from the bank where he worked, thousands of dollars over the course of 2 years. When I confronted him, he hit me harder than he ever had before. He said I knew too much, that I was a liability. He convinced me to come west with him, said we were going to start fresh in California, but I knew. I knew he was planning something. Nathan's expression was grim, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. He planned to kill you all along. Yes, the train was perfect. Remote, few witnesses. He bribed someone to let us ride in the freight car, said it would be an adventure. And then when we were crossing through the highest, most isolated stretch, she swallowed hard. He just pushed me. I did not even see it coming. One moment I was looking out at the snow, and the next his hands were on my back and I was falling. Son of a bitch, Nathan said, the words sharp with anger. I'm sorry. I know he's your husband, but he's not my husband, Julia said fiercely. Not anymore. The moment he pushed me from that train, whatever bond existed between us was severed. I don't care what any law says. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. What do you want to do? When you're healed, I mean. Do you have family you can go to? Friends? Julia shook her head. No one. My mother's family disowned her when she married my father. He was Irish, and they considered it beneath her. His family is all back in Ireland, and I have no way to contact them. The few friends I had before marriage drifted away after Richard isolated me. She felt the helplessness of her situation settle over her like a weight. I have nothing. No money, no home, nowhere to go. You have this, Nathan said firmly. You can stay here as long as you need to. Hell, you can stay here permanently if you want. I've got the room, and I could use help with the place come spring. Julia stared at him. You barely know me. Why would you offer that? Because you need help, and I can give it. He said it as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Look, Julia, I'm not going to pretend I understand what you have been through, but I know what it's like to feel alone in the world, and I know that sometimes all a person needs is a chance to get back on their feet. Let me give you that chance. Tears spilled down Julia's cheeks before she could stop them. You are the kindest man I have ever met. Nathan looked embarrassed, ducking his head. I am just doing what any decent person would do. No, Julia said. You're doing far more than that. As January gave way to February, Julia grew stronger. She could move around the cabin with relative ease now, and she insisted on helping with tasks despite Nathan's protests. She could not do heavy work with her arm still healing, but she could cook, which was a skill Nathan admitted he possessed only in the most basic sense. I can keep myself fed, he said, watching with something like awe as Julia coaxed his simple ingredients into a proper stew. But this is actual food, real food. Julia laughed, and it felt strange and wonderful she could not remember the last time she had genuinely laughed. It is just stew, Nathan. It's the best thing I have tasted in months, he declared, and his enthusiasm was so genuine that Julia felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. They fell into an easy routine. Nathan would rise before dawn to tend the animals and check his traps, returning as the sun came up with whatever he had caught. Julia would have coffee ready and breakfast cooking. They would eat together, talking about small things, the weather, the wildlife, stories from their pasts. Then Nathan would head out again to work on repairs to the barn or check his cattle, while Julia tidied the cabin and prepared the midday meal. Evenings were spent by the fire, Nathan working on tack or carving, Julia mending his clothes or reading from the small collection of books he owned. It was domestic and peaceful, and utterly unlike anything Julia had experienced in her marriage. There was no tension here, no walking on eggshells, no fear. Nathan never raised his voice, never showed anything but patience and consideration. When he spoke to her, he looked her in the eye and listened to her answers as if her thoughts actually mattered. It was revolutionary. One evening in late February, as they sat by the fire after supper, Nathan asked the question Julia had been dreading. Have you thought about what you want to do? About Richard, I mean. Julia set down her mending, her stomach clenching. I do not know what I can do. If I go to the law and accuse him of attempted murder, it's my word against his, and he's a respected banker from Chicago. I'm just his wife who disappeared. Who is going to believe me? You've got the injuries to prove something happened to you, Nathan pointed out. Injuries that could have come from any kind of accident. He'll say I was foolish, that I fell, that I wandered off confused. He'll paint me as hysterical or mad. Julia heard the bitterness in her own voice. I have seen how these things go. The woman is never believed. Nathan was quiet, his jaw tight. It's not right. No, it's not, but it's the way of the world. Julia picked up her mending again, her movements sharp with frustration. All I can do is stay hidden and hope he thinks I died in the snow. If he believes I'm dead, he has no reason to come looking for me. And if he does not believe it, if he comes to Ashfork asking questions, then I will have to run again, Julia said quietly, and keep running for the rest of my life. The idea clearly did not sit well with Nathan, but he did not push. Instead, he stood and crossed to his trunk, rummaging around until he emerged with something in his hand. He came to Julia and held it out a small derringer, the metal gleaming in the firelight. I want you to have this, he said. I know it's not much, but it's accurate at close range and easy to conceal. If Richard or anyone else tries to hurt you, you defend yourself. You hear me? Julia took the little gun, surprised by its weight. I've never shot anyone. Hopefully you will never have to, but I want you to know you can if you need to. His eyes were intense, boring into hers. You are not helpless, Julia. You survived that fall. You survived exposure. You survived a man who tried to kill you. You are stronger than you know. The conviction in his voice made something shift inside Julia's chest. She found herself looking at Nathan, really looking at him, and seeing not just her rescuer, but a man, a good, honest, honorable man who had shown her more kindness in 2 months than Richard had in 2 years, a man whose presence made her feel safe and valued, a man who was starting to occupy her thoughts far more than was probably appropriate. Thank you, she whispered, and the words carried more weight than just gratitude for the gun. Nathan seemed to understand. His hand came up, almost as if he might touch her face, but then he caught himself and stepped back. You should get some rest. I am going to check the perimeter before I turn in. He left the cabin, and Julia sat holding the derringer, her heart beating faster than it should. She was falling for him. Despite everything, despite her broken marriage and shattered trust, despite knowing she had no right to feel anything for anyone, she was falling for Nathan Xavier. March brought the first hints of spring, and with it came Julia's full recovery. The splint came off her arm, and though the bone was still tender, she could use it again. Her ribs no longer ached with every breath, and the scar on her temple had faded to a thin white line barely visible beneath her hairline. She was herself again, or at least a new version of herself, one who knew how to chop wood and skin rabbits, who could read weather signs and track game, who had learned to shoot with reasonable accuracy. Nathan had been teaching her, taking her out behind the cabin for target practice. He was a patient instructor, showing her how to stand, how to breathe, how to squeeze, rather than pull the trigger. Julia found she had a decent eye for it, hitting the targets more often than not. You are a natural, Nathan said one afternoon after she hit 3 cans in a row. Better than some of the cavalry recruits I knew. Julia flushed with pleasure at the compliment. I have a good teacher. They stood close together in the spring sunshine, and Julia was acutely aware of Nathan's proximity, the warmth of him, the scent of soap and leather that clung to his skin, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The air between them felt charged with something unspoken, and she wondered if he felt it too. Julia, he said, his voice lower than usual, I need to tell you something. Her heart hammered. What is it? I have to go into Ashfork tomorrow. I have been putting it off, but the marshal needs my report on the rustler situation, and I need supplies we cannot do without. He paused. I want you to come with me. Julia stepped back, shaking her head. Nathan, I cannot. If someone recognizes me, if word gets back to Richard, no one in Ashfork knows what you look like, Nathan said reasonably. And you cannot hide out here forever. You need to be able to move freely, to not live in fear. Besides, he hesitated. I want to check the telegraph office, see if there's been any news about Richard Pemberton or a missing wife. If he thinks you are dead, we need to know. And if he is looking for you, we need to know that too. Julia hated that he was right. She could not spend the rest of her life cowering in Nathan's cabin, no matter how safe it felt. All right, she said finally. I will go. But I want to change my appearance as much as possible. Cut my hair, maybe. Wear different clothes. You can wear some of my old things, Nathan offered. Dress like a man. No one will look twice at a cowhand riding into town with me. The next morning, Julia stood in front of Nathan's shaving mirror, scissors in hand. Her hair had always been long, hanging past her waist in heavy chestnut waves. It was her one vanity, the one thing about her appearance she had always liked. But it was also distinctive, memorable. With a deep breath, she began to cut. Nathan found her half an hour later, surrounded by drifts of brown hair, her hands shaking. He took the scissors from her gently and finished the job, evening out the ragged edges until her hair hung just past her shoulders in soft layers that framed her face. You look different, he said quietly, but still beautiful. Julia's breath caught at the open admiration in his eyes. Nathan, I know, he said. I know I should not say things like that. I know you are married and you have been through hell, and the last thing you need is me making things complicated. But Julia, I have to be honest with you. These past months with you here, they have been the best months of my life. You make this place feel like a home instead of just a cabin. You make me want to be better, to do more. And he stopped, his jaw working. I care about you. More than I should. Julia's eyes burned with unshed tears. I care about you, too. So much it frightens me. But Nathan, I am still married in the eyes of the law. Even if Richard is a monster, even if he tried to kill me, I cannot just pretend those vows do not exist. I know. Nathan's hand came up, cupping her cheek with infinite tenderness. I am not asking you for anything. Julia, I just needed you to know how I feel. Whatever happens, whatever you decide to do, I will respect it. But I could not let another day go by without telling you the truth. Julia leaned into his touch, allowing herself this one moment of weakness. What are we going to do? We are going to take this one day at a time, Nathan said, starting with this trip to town. Come on, let's get you dressed. The ride to Ashfork took 2 hours, and Julia spent every minute of it acutely aware of Nathan beside her. She wore his spare clothes, denim trousers, a loose shirt, a canvas jacket, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over her eyes. To any casual observer, she looked like exactly what Nathan had suggested, a young cowhand riding with his boss. Ashfork was a small town, just a collection of wooden buildings clustered around the railroad tracks. There was a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, a church, and the marshal's office. Nathan led them to the general store first, tying their horses to the rail outside. Stay close to me, he murmured as they climbed the steps. Keep your head down and let me do the talking. Inside, the store smelled of coffee and leather and dried herbs. An older woman stood behind the counter, and she brightened when she saw Nathan. Nathan Xavier, as I live and breathe, I have not seen you in town since before Christmas. How are you managing out there? Just fine, Mrs. Henderson. I need to stock up on a few things. He handed over a list he had prepared. While Mrs. Henderson gathered supplies, Julia wandered the aisles, keeping her face averted. She found herself drawn to the small selection of women's items, ribbons, buttons, a few bolts of calico. They were simple things, but after months of wearing Nathan's cast-offs, she longed for something feminine again. See something you like? Nathan's voice was quiet at her shoulder. Julia shook her head. Just looking. But later, when Mrs. Henderson was tallying up their purchases, Nathan added a bolt of blue calico and a packet of needles to the pile. Julia started to protest, but he silenced her with a look. Consider it payment for all the cooking and mending you have done, he said. They left the store with their supplies and headed for the marshal's office. This was the part Julia had been dreading, but Nathan squeezed her hand briefly before opening the door. Marshal Tom Brennan was a weathered man in his 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He stood when Nathan entered, extending his hand. Xavier, good to see you. I was starting to wonder if you had frozen to death out there. Takes more than a hard winter to kill me, Marshal. Nathan shook his hand and gestured to Julia. This is my new ranch hand, Jesse. Jesse, Marshal Brennan. Julia mumbled a greeting, keeping her voice low and her face shadowed. The marshal barely glanced at her, his attention on Nathan. What have you got for me on those rustlers? Nathan gave his report, detailing the tracks he had found and his assessment of the situation. While they talked, Julia's attention drifted to a stack of wanted posters on the marshal's desk. She scanned them quickly, looking for any mention of Richard or herself. There was nothing. No reward for a missing wife. No bulletin about a woman who had fallen from a train. It was as if the incident had never happened. Something interesting? Marshal Brennan asked, and Julia realized he was watching her. Just curious, she said, remembering to keep her voice pitched low. The marshal grunted. Most of those are old. Haven't had much action lately, thank God. Last excitement we had was back in December when the freight line reported a door left open on one of the cars. Thought maybe there was a robbery, but nothing turned out to be missing. Railroad company figured it was just a mechanical failure. Julia's blood ran cold. An open door. That was all they had reported. Not a passenger falling, not a woman disappearing, just an open door, which meant Richard had covered his tracks perfectly. As far as anyone knew, Julia Pemberton had simply never existed. Nathan must have sensed her distress because he wrapped up his conversation quickly. We should be heading back, Marshal. Still got a few hours of daylight, and I want to make use of them. Sure thing. Good work, as always, Xavier. I will let you know if I need you again. They were halfway to their horses when a voice called out from behind them. Nathan Xavier, is that you? Julia's heart stopped. She knew that voice, though she had only heard it a handful of times. She turned slowly to see a tall, well-dressed man stepping out of the saloon, a man with slicked back blonde hair and cold blue eyes that she would recognize anywhere. Richard Pemberton had come to Ashfork. Nathan's hand found the small of Julia's back, a silent reassurance, but he kept his posture casual as Richard approached. Up close, Julia could see the differences in her husband. He looked thinner, his face haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. But his smile was as charming as ever as he extended his hand to Nathan. Forgive me. I think I may have mistaken you for someone else. I am looking for a Mr. Xavier who scouts for the marshal. Would that be you? Might be, Nathan said carefully, not taking the offered hand. What's your business? My name is Richard Pemberton. I am searching for my wife. She went missing in December, and I have reason to believe she may have been in this area. He pulled a photograph from his pocket, holding it out. This is Julia. Have you seen her? Julia kept her head down, her hat brim hiding her face, but she could see the photograph. It was from their wedding day, her hair elaborately styled, wearing a dress with lace at the collar. She looked like a different person, younger, naive, hopeful. Nothing like the weathered cow hand she appeared to be now. Nathan studied the photograph, his expression giving nothing away. Can't say I have. What makes you think she is around here? She was traveling with me on a train that passed through this region in December. We had a terrible argument and Richard's voice broke convincingly. She got off at one of the stops, said she needed time to think, that she would catch up with me in California. But she never arrived, and I have been beside myself with worry. It was a masterful performance, Julia had to admit. Richard sounded like a concerned husband, not a murderer covering his tracks. Have you checked with the railroad? Nathan asked. Of course. They have no record of her purchasing a ticket from any of the stops. I have checked every town along the line, hired investigators, offered a reward. No one has seen her. Richard's eyes swept over Julia dismissively before returning to Nathan. You scout these lands, yes? If she had tried to travel cross-country, might you have seen signs? These mountains in winter will kill someone in hours if they do not know what they are doing, Nathan said bluntly. If your wife left the train anywhere in this territory without proper gear, I am sorry to say she likely did not survive. Richard's face crumpled. I feared as much, but I had to be certain. I cannot rest until I know what happened to her. He pulled out a card. This is where I am staying in Flagstaff. If you hear anything, see anything at all, please contact me. There is a substantial reward for information. Nathan took the card without looking at it. I will keep my eyes open, but like I said, winter in these mountains is deadly. You should prepare yourself for the worst. Yes, I suppose you are right. Richard looked genuinely devastated, and Julia felt a chill run down her spine. He truly believed she was dead. The thought should have relieved her, but instead, it made her realize how easily he had erased her from existence. Thank you for your time, Mr. Xavier. Good day. He walked away, his shoulders slumped, every inch the grieving husband. Nathan waited until he had disappeared around the corner before he grabbed Julia's arm and steered her quickly to the horses. We need to leave now. They rode hard for the first mile, not speaking, putting distance between themselves and town. Finally, when Ashfork had disappeared behind them, Nathan slowed his horse to a walk and looked at Julia. Are you all right? Julia was shaking, her hands tight on the reins. He thinks I am dead. He truly believes it. That might work in your favor, Nathan said carefully. If he is convinced you died in the snow, he has no reason to keep looking. But he is looking. He is hiring investigators, offering rewards. Nathan, what if someone saw me? What if someone in town recognizes me from that photograph? No one is going to recognize you, Nathan said firmly. That picture shows a woman with long hair, fancy clothes, and a soft city look about her. You look nothing like that now. You could have walked right up to him, and he would not have known you. Julia wanted to believe him, but fear had lodged itself deep in her chest. What are we going to do? We are going to go home, Nathan said, and we are going to figure this out together. But Julia, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She met his eyes, seeing the steadfast determination there, the unshakable resolve. Yes, I trust you. The ride back to the cabin seemed to take forever, but finally they crested the last rise and saw the familiar log structure nestled in its clearing. Nathan helped Julia down from her horse, and she realized she was still trembling. Come on, he said gently, guiding her inside. Let me make you some coffee. But once they were inside, Julia found she could not hold herself together any longer. The fear and tension of the day crashed over her, and she sank down onto the bed, her face in her hands. He almost saw me, she whispered. I was standing right there, and he almost saw me. Nathan knelt in front of her, his hands covering hers. But he did not. Julia, you were perfect. You did not give anything away. I cannot do this, Nathan. I cannot live like this. Always looking over my shoulder, always afraid. What kind of life is that? Then we find another way, Nathan said fiercely. Julia, listen to me. Richard Pemberton tried to murder you. That is not a civil matter, that is a criminal one. And I know you think no one will believe you, but I believe you. My testimony counts for something in this territory. If we go to the marshal together, if I tell him exactly what condition I found you in and where, it will carry weight. Julia shook her head. It's still my word against his. And he is so convincing. Nathan, you saw him today. He could charm anyone into believing him. Maybe, but there is another option. Nathan's hands tightened on hers. You could divorce him. Julia stared at him. On what grounds? Desertion, abuse, attempted murder. Julia, you have grounds enough for 10 divorces. It would not be easy and it would not be quick, but it could be done. And in the meantime, what do I do? Where do I go? You stay here, Nathan said simply, with me, as long as you want, as long as you need. I meant what I said before, this is your home if you want it to be. Julia looked into his face, seeing the sincerity there, the open affection that he no longer tried to hide. Nathan, I cannot ask you to do that, to tie yourself to someone else's problems, to risk your reputation by having an unmarried woman living with you. Then marry me. The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. Julia's breath stopped. What? Nathan did not look away. Marry me. Divorce Richard if you can, but if you cannot, if the law will not help you, then to hell with the law. Marry me in the way that matters with your heart and your choice. Live here with me as my wife, and anyone who has a problem with it can answer to me. Nathan, you do not mean that. You cannot. I mean every word. He moved closer, his hands framing her face. Julia, I know we have not known each other long. I know the circumstances are complicated, but I also know that I wake up every morning grateful that I found you in that snow. I know that you make me happier than I have ever been. I know that I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you feel safe and valued and loved. If that is not a good enough reason to marry someone, I do not know what is. Tears streamed down Julia's face. I am still legally married to another man. In the eyes of God and the law, God knows what is in your heart, Nathan said softly. And as for the law, we will work that out in time. But Julia, I am not asking you to make a decision right now. I am just telling you that the option is there, that I am here, and I am not going anywhere. Julia could not speak past the lump in her throat, so she did the only thing she could. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was tentative at first, barely a brush of lips, but then Nathan's arms came around her and the kiss deepened. It was nothing like kissing Richard, which had always felt like a transaction, a duty to be performed. This was warmth and connection and promise, and Julia felt something long dormant stir to life in her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I need you to know that. I love you too, Julia whispered, and saying the words aloud felt like stepping off a cliff into open air, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, and Julia felt some of the fear that had dogged her for months begin to ease. She was not alone. She was not helpless. She had Nathan, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Over the following weeks, life settled into a new pattern. Julia and Nathan did not speak again of marriage or the future, but something fundamental had shifted between them. The touches became more frequent, his hand on her shoulder as he passed, her fingers lingering on his as she handed him his coffee. At night, when the mountain cold pressed close to the cabin, Julia found herself in Nathan's arms by the fire, her head on his chest as he told her stories of his cavalry days or his childhood in Kansas. It was not the relationship she had imagined having, born as it was from violence and survival, but it was real in a way her marriage to Richard had never been. Nathan never demanded anything from her, never pushed for more than she was ready to give. He simply offered his presence, his protection, and his love without condition or expectation of return. April brought the true arrival of spring, and with it, the need to prepare the ranch for the coming year. Nathan's cattle began returning from their winter range, and Julia discovered she had a knack for working with the animals. Nathan taught her to rope and brand, to recognize signs of illness, to read the moods of the herd. It was hard, physical work, but Julia found she loved it, loved the sense of accomplishment, the feeling of being useful, the satisfaction of building something with her own hands. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Nathan said quietly, I have been thinking about what you said, about Richard and the law. Julia tensed. And? I think we should go to Flagstaff. Talk to a lawyer about divorce proceedings. Even if it takes time, even if it is messy, I think you deserve to be free of him in every way that matters. That is a risk, Julia said carefully. Going to a lawyer means revealing who I am, where I am. If word gets back to Richard, then we find a lawyer we can trust. Maybe someone who specializes in helping women in difficult situations. They exist, Julia. There are people who would help you if we just asked. Julia wanted to believe him, but years of Richard's control had taught her to be cautious. What if the lawyer sides with Richard? What if he uses the information to find me? Nathan took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Then we will deal with it. Together. But Julia, I cannot stand the idea of you living the rest of your life in legal limbo, tied to a man who tried to kill you. You deserve better than that. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him. I will think about it. I promise. But fate, as it turned out, had other plans. 3 days later, Nathan returned from a trip to check his line shack to find Julia in the cabin, her face pale, holding a telegram that had been delivered by a writer from town. What is it? Nathan asked, his stomach dropping at her expression. It is from Richard's bank in Chicago, Julia said, her voice shaking. They sent it to the Ashfork telegraph office, asking if anyone had information about Richard Pemberton. Apparently, she swallowed hard. Apparently, he never made it to California. They found his body in a ravine outside Flagstaff 2 days ago. He is dead, Nathan. Richard is dead. Nathan took the telegram, reading it quickly. The bank was asking for information about Richard's widow, about his affairs, about his last known whereabouts. How did they know to contact Ashfork? He must have sent correspondence from here, or someone saw him in town and reported it. Julia's hands were shaking. Nathan, this changes everything. Julia, you need to breathe. Come here, sit down. Nathan guided her to a chair, kneeling in front of her. Tell me what you are thinking. I am thinking that I am free, Julia said, and then immediately felt guilty. Is that terrible? He is dead, and all I can think is that I am finally free. It is not terrible. It is human. Nathan covered her hands with his. What do you want to do about this? The bank is looking for you. You are his next of kin, which means whatever he had becomes yours. Julia laughed bitterly. Whatever he had was stolen from other people. I do not want it. Then we figure out how to return it. But Julia, this is your chance. You can reclaim your identity, your name. You can stop hiding. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. I would have to go back. To Flagstaff, maybe to Chicago. I would have to face questions, investigations. People would want to know where I have been, what happened. And you will tell them the truth, Nathan said firmly. That your husband tried to kill you, that you survived, and that you have been recovering. I will be right there beside you, backing up every word. Julia looked at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, and felt her fear begin to transform into something else, determination. You are right. I need to do this. Not for Richard, but for me. I need to prove that I survived him. Then we will go to Flagstaff tomorrow, Nathan said. Together. The trip to Flagstaff took 2 days, and Julia spent most of it feeling like she might be sick. Nathan stayed close, offering quiet reassurance whenever her anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. They arrived in the city as the sun was setting, finding lodging at a respectable boarding house where Nathan introduced Julia as his fiancée. The next morning, they went to the law office that had been handling Richard's affairs. The lawyer, a Mr. Donovan, was a shrewd-eyed man in his 60s who looked Julia up and down with evident curiosity. Mrs. Pemberton, I presume? We have been searching for you for some time. I am she, Julia said, forcing her voice to remain steady, though I only just learned of my husband's death. May I ask where you have been? There has been quite a bit of concern about your whereabouts. Julia glanced at Nathan, who gave her an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, she told her story, not all of it, but enough. She explained that Richard had attacked her on the train, that she had been injured and disoriented, that she had been recovering at a remote location. She did not mention being pushed or Richard's embezzlement, not yet. Those were details for later, when she had a better sense of who she was dealing with. Mr. Donovan listened carefully, making notes. I see. And this gentleman is? Nathan Xavier. He found me after the incident and helped me recover. How fortunate. Mr. Donovan's tone suggested he did not entirely believe the story, but he seemed willing to proceed. Well, Mrs. Pemberton, I am afraid I have some difficult news. Your husband's death was ruled an accident. His horse apparently threw him in rough terrain, but in the course of settling his affairs, certain irregularities have come to light. The bank in Chicago has discovered evidence of embezzlement, and they are pursuing legal action against his estate. Julia feigned surprise. Embezzlement? I do not understand. It appears Mr. Pemberton had been stealing from the bank for some time. The total amount is still being calculated, but it is substantial in the tens of thousands of dollars. Mr. Donovan watched her carefully. Did you have any knowledge of this, Mrs. Pemberton? None whatsoever, Julia said, which was almost true. She had not known until shortly before her attempted murder. My husband handled all our finances. I was not privy to his business dealings. Mr. Donovan seemed to accept this. The bank will likely try to recoup their losses from the estate, which means there may be very little left for you to inherit. Additionally, there may be questions about whether you benefited from the stolen funds. I want nothing from my husband's estate, Julia said firmly. If there is money remaining after the bank's claims are satisfied, I would like it donated to charity, and if there are questions about my involvement, I am prepared to cooperate fully with any investigation. This seemed to surprise the lawyer. You are certain? Even if you are entitled to something? I am certain. I want nothing from Richard Pemberton except my freedom. Mr. Donovan made more notes. Very well. I will need you to sign some documents, and there will likely be depositions required. Are you planning to remain in Flagstaff? Julia hesitated, and Nathan spoke up. Mrs. Pemberton will be staying with me at my ranch near Ashfork. We can be reached through the marshal's office there. And your relationship to Mrs. Pemberton is? Mr. Donovan asked, one eyebrow raised. We are engaged to be married, Nathan said evenly, as soon as a proper mourning period has passed. Julia felt her face heat, but she did not contradict him. Let them think what they wanted. Soon enough, it would be true. Over the next 2 weeks, Julia gave depositions to bank investigators, answered endless questions from lawyers, and signed what felt like hundreds of documents. Through it all, Nathan was beside her, a solid presence that kept her grounded. The investigators clearly found her story suspicious, a wife who knew nothing of her husband's crimes, who conveniently disappeared for months only to resurface after his death, but they could find no evidence linking her to the embezzlement. Eventually, reluctantly, they cleared her of involvement. The bank seized what remained of Richard's assets, which turned out to be very little. He had spent or hidden most of the stolen money, and what little was left went to repaying his victims. Julia signed away any claim to his estate without a second thought, wanting nothing that would tie her to him. Finally, blessedly, it was over. Mr. Donovan presented her with the death certificate and the final settlement documents, along with one surprise, a small bank account in Julia's maiden name that her father had apparently set up before his death. It had been sitting untouched for years, accruing interest, and now contained nearly $500. This is yours alone, Mr. Donovan said. It was never part of the marital estate because it predates your marriage and is in your name only. Julia stared at the paperwork, tears pricking her eyes. It was a gift from beyond the grave, her father's way of making sure she always had something of her own. Thank you, she whispered. When they finally left Flagstaff, headed back to Nathan's cabin, Julia felt lighter than she had in years. She was free truly, legally free. Richard was dead, his crimes exposed, and she owed him nothing. The nightmare was over. Nathan must have sensed her mood because he reached over and squeezed her hand. "How do you feel?" "Like I can breathe again," Julia said. "Like I have been underwater for 3 years, and I have finally surfaced." "Good, because I have a question to ask you, and I want to do it properly this time." He pulled his horse to a stop in a pretty meadow, wildflowers blooming in purple and yellow all around them. Dismounting, he came to help Julia down, then kept hold of her hands. "Julia Nolan," he said, his gray-blue eyes serious and warm, "I love you. I have loved you since the day I found you in the snow, and I am going to love you for the rest of my life. I know we have been through hell to get here, and I know this is not the conventional way to do things, but I do not care about convention. I care about you, so I am asking you properly and officially, will you marry me?" Julia felt tears spill over, but they were good tears this time, tears of joy rather than pain. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Nathan Xavier, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise, and Julia felt the last chains of her past fall away. She was no longer Julia Pemberton, trapped wife of a criminal. She was Julia Nolan, survivor and fighter, and she was about to become Julia Xavier, wife to the best man she had ever known. They were married in Ashfork a month later, in the small church with Marshall Brennan and Mrs. Henderson as witnesses. Julia wore a dress she had sewn herself from the blue calico Nathan had bought her, her short hair tucked under a simple veil. Nathan wore his Sunday best, his hair neatly trimmed, looking so handsome that Julia's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. The ceremony was simple, but the vows they spoke were heartfelt and real in a way Julia's first wedding had never been. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her with such tenderness that Julia felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Happy tears, I hope," Nathan murmured against her lips. "The happiest," she confirmed. They held a small celebration at the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson having prepared a feast that seemed far too elaborate for just 4 people. But the joy in the room was palpable, and Julia found herself laughing more than she had in years. Marshall Brennan gave a rambling toast about Nathan being one of the good ones, and Mrs. Henderson kept patting Julia's hand and saying how lovely she looked. As the sun set, Nathan and Julia rode back to the cabin, their cabin now, truly theirs together. Nathan carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, and set her down gently in the middle of the room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," he said softly. "I have been home for months," Julia replied, reaching up to cup his face. "Ever since you found me in the snow, ever since you showed me what kindness looked like, ever since I fell in love with you." That night, they came together as husband and wife for the first time, and it was everything Julia had never known physical intimacy could be. There was tenderness and passion, laughter, and whispered words of love. Nathan treated her like she was precious, like she was cherished, and Julia finally understood what it meant to truly give yourself to another person. Afterward, lying wrapped in each other's arms by the fire, Nathan traced patterns on her shoulder and said quietly, "I want you to know something. I did not save you that day in the snow. You saved yourself by being strong enough to survive. All I did was give you a safe place to heal." Julia turned to look at him. "You gave me far more than that. You gave me hope again. You taught me that not all men are cruel, that love does not have to hurt. You showed me who I could be when I was not afraid. So yes, you did save me, Nathan, in every way that matters." He kissed her forehead, pulling her closer. "Then I guess we saved each other." The years that followed were not always easy. Ranch life was hard, and there were lean times and difficult seasons, but they were good years, full of love and laughter and partnership. Julia threw herself into building their life together, learning everything she could about ranching and homesteading. She proved to have a natural talent for animal husbandry, and within 3 years, they had expanded their herd to over 100 head of cattle. Their first child, a son they named William James Xavier, was born in the spring of 1878, delivered by Mrs. Henderson, with Nathan pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When he was finally allowed to enter and saw Julia cradling their dark-haired baby boy, tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered, reaching out to touch William's tiny hand. "You are perfect." "We made him together," Julia said softly. "This beautiful, perfect thing. After everything, we made something beautiful." William was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Sarah Grace, who had her mother's chestnut hair and her father's gray-blue eyes. She was a spirited child, always into everything, and Nathan doted on her shamelessly. Julia would often find them together in the barn, Sarah perched on Nathan's shoulders as he showed her the horses, or sitting by the fire while he told her stories of brave cowboys and adventure. The cabin expanded over the years, Nathan adding rooms as their family grew. They built a proper bedroom, a nursery, even a small room that Julia used for sewing and reading. The ranch prospered too, becoming known throughout the territory for the quality of its beef and the integrity of its owners. Julia never forgot the darkness of her past, but it no longer defined her. She had faced death and survived, had stared evil in the eye and refused to let it break her. That strength stayed with her, informing everything she did, every choice she made. She became known in Ashfork and the surrounding area as a woman who could be counted on, someone who helped other women in difficult situations, who offered refuge and counsel to those fleeing bad marriages or dangerous men. Nathan supported this work wholeheartedly, and together they became informal advocates for women's rights in the territory. It was not always popular, and they faced criticism from those who thought wives should be obedient and silent, but neither of them cared. They knew too well what silence could cost. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Julia on a trip to the mountains, leaving the children with Mrs. Henderson for 3 days. They camped under the stars, rode through meadows of wildflowers, and made love in the open air with a freedom and joy that still felt miraculous to Julia. On the last night, as they lay wrapped in blankets by the fire, Julia said, "Do you ever think about that day when you found me?" "Every day," Nathan admitted. "I think about how easily I could have missed you, how different my life would be if I had ridden a different route or left an hour later. It terrifies me sometimes how close I came to losing you before I ever knew you." "But you did not miss me," Julia said. "You found me exactly when you were supposed to." "I do not think it was accident, Nathan. I think we were meant to find each other." "I believe that too." He pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Julia Xavier. Every day with you is a gift." Julia smiled into the darkness. "Then I hope we have thousands more days together, a whole lifetime of them." "That is my plan," Nathan said, "to spend every day I have left loving you." They had 37 more years together, in the end. 37 years of building their ranch, raising their children, and growing old side by side. William took over the ranch when Nathan's back finally gave out from years of hard labor, and Sarah married a young lawyer and moved to Phoenix, where she championed women's suffrage and education. Julia and Nathan became grandparents 6 times over, their cabin always full of visiting family and laughter. They watched Arizona transform from territory to state, saw the railroad expand and the old wild ways gradually fade into history. But through all the changes, their love remained constant, the one true north in a shifting world. When Nathan died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 91, Julia held his hand and whispered her thanks for every moment they had shared. She followed him 2 years later, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and her last words were his name. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, their graves marked with simple headstones. William had an inscription added beneath their names. He found her in the snow. She found her way home. Together, they found love. The ranch remained in the Xavier family for 3 more generations, and the story of Nathan and Julia became family legend: the cowboy who rescued a broken woman from the snow, and the woman who proved that survival was only the beginning, that healing was possible, and that love could bloom even in the harshest winters. In the small historical society in Ashfork, there is a photograph displayed of an older couple standing in front of a log cabin, surrounded by cattle and children. The woman is smiling, her arm linked through the man's, and there is something in her expression, a fierce joy, a quiet triumph that speaks of battles won and peace earned. The placard beneath reads, Nathan and Julia Xavier, pioneers of northern Arizona, married 1877. But what the placard does not say, what cannot be captured in official records or museum displays, is the truth of what they meant to each other. How a moment of compassion in the snow changed 2 lives forever. How the worst thing that ever happened to Julia led her to the best thing: a man who saw her worth when she had forgotten it, who loved her without condition, who proved that not all endings are sad and not all stories of survival are merely about surviving. Their story was about redemption and second chances, about choosing love in the face of fear, about building something beautiful from the ashes of trauma. It was about a cowboy who rode out into a blizzard and found not just a woman in need of rescue, but his future, his partner, his home. And it was about a woman who fell from a train and landed in snow, broken and abandoned, but who rose again stronger, fiercer, and more alive than she had ever been. A woman who learned that she was not defined by what had been done to her, but by what she chose to do next. In the end, that was the real story, not of a victim saved, but of 2 people who found each other at exactly the right moment and chose to build a life together. A life filled with hard work and laughter, with children and cattle, with quiet evenings by the fire, and passionate nights under the stars. A life that proved love did not have to be grand or dramatic to be real. It just had to be honest and freely given. Nathan Xavier found Julia Nolan broken in the snow, but what he really found was his heart. And Julia, falling through frigid air expecting death, instead fell into a life beyond anything she had imagined: a life of purpose and partnership, of healing and growth, of becoming the woman she was always meant to be. Their love story was not conventional, and it did not start with romance or courtship. It started with survival and compassion, with small kindnesses and steady presence. But those foundations proved stronger than any passionate declaration could have been. They built their love slowly, carefully, with the same attention and dedication they brought to building their ranch. And like that ranch, their love endured through seasons of plenty and seasons of want, through joy and sorrow, through every challenge life threw at them. The trains still run through northern Arizona, though the old freight line has long since been abandoned. Sometimes, on winter nights when the snow falls heavy and the wind howls through the mountains, locals swear they can hear the distant whistle of that long-ago train, the one that carried a woman to what should have been her death, but instead delivered her to her destiny. And in the old Xavier cabin, which still stands on its hill overlooking miles of grazing land, there is a feeling of peace that settles over visitors. It is as if the love that was built there, the healing that took place within those walls, left something behind: a reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope remains. That rescue can come from unexpected places. That love, real love, asks for nothing but gives everything. The story of Nathan and Julia Xavier became the story whispered to young girls who doubted they would ever escape bad situations, the story told to remind people that the worst day of your life might lead to the best days ahead. It became a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of believing survivors, and the truth that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply keep living. Their great-great-granddaughter, a writer living in Phoenix, eventually turned their story into a book. She spent years researching, reading Julia's journals and Nathan's letters. interviewing family members who remembered the stories passed down through generations. When the book was published, it became a regional bestseller, inspiring countless readers with its message of resilience and redemption. But for those who knew the real Nathan and Julia, no book could capture the full truth of what they meant to each other and to everyone whose lives they touched. They were not perfect people. Nathan could be stubborn. Julia sometimes struggled with trust even decades after Richard's death, but they were real, and their love was real, and that realness was what made their story so powerful. In the Ashfork Cemetery, their graves are still tended by family members who make the pilgrimage from across the state. Fresh flowers appear on their headstones every year on their wedding anniversary, and sometimes on December 15th, the day Nathan found Julia in the snow and both their lives changed forever. That date, marked in family Bibles and journals, was considered by the Xaviers to be as important as any official anniversary. It was the day that proved miracles still happened, that one person's choice to be kind could ripple out across generations. It was the day a cowboy on a routine patrol happened to look up at just the right moment and see something dark against the white snow. The day he chose to investigate instead of riding on. The day he made a promise to a dying woman and spent the rest of his life keeping it. Julia never returned to Chicago. She never reconciled with her mother's family, who she learned had died without ever knowing what happened to her. She never received justice in any legal sense for what Richard did to her. He escaped earthly consequences through his death, but she found something better than justice. She found peace. In her later years, Julia wrote extensively in her journals, and one passage in particular stood out to her descendants. People ask me if I forgive Richard for what he did. The truth is, I do not think about Richard at all anymore. Forgiveness implies he still has some claim on my thoughts, some power over my present, but he has none. He is a closed chapter, a cautionary tale, a reminder of who I never want to be. My life began the day Nathan found me in the snow, and everything before that is just prologue. If that makes me cold or unforgiving, so be it. I choose to spend my energy on living, not on giving space in my heart to the dead. It was a philosophy that served her well. Julia threw herself into life with an enthusiasm that was infectious. She learned to rope and ride as well as any cowhand, could shoot straight and true, nursed sick cattle back to health, delivered calves in the middle of snowstorms, and once fought off a cougar that threatened her children. She was fierce and capable, and absolutely certain of her own worth, a far cry from the broken woman Nathan had carried to his cabin that December day. Nathan often said that watching Julia become herself was the greatest privilege of his life. He saw her blossom from a frightened, injured woman into a force of nature, and he never once tried to constrain or control that growth. Instead, he supported it, encouraged it, celebrated it. When Julia wanted to learn to break horses, he taught her. When she decided to start a small school for the ranch children in the area, he helped her build it. When she announced she was going to run for a position on the local school board, one of the first women in the territory to do so, he campaigned tirelessly on her behalf. Their partnership was one of equals, rare for the time, but absolutely natural for them. They made major decisions together, divided the work according to ability and preference rather than strict gender roles, and raised their children to believe that men and women were partners, not master and servant. This progressive attitude earned them some enemies among the more traditional ranchers, but it also earned them respect and loyalty from those who worked for them. The Xavier Ranch became known as a place where everyone was treated fairly, where hard work was rewarded regardless of who did it, and where women were safe. More than one woman fleeing a bad situation found temporary refuge with the Xaviers, and Nathan and Julia never turned anyone away. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Julia watched the world change in ways she could never have imagined. The telephone came to Ashfork, then electricity, then automobiles. The wild frontier she had known became settled and civilized. Women won the right to vote. The old ways faded, replaced by modernity. Through it all, the constants in Julia's life were the land, her family, and Nathan. Even as their bodies aged and slowed, their love remained vibrant and alive. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed goodbye before Nathan rode out to check the herd, still sat together on the porch in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing. "You know what I have been thinking about?" Nathan said one evening when they were both in their 70s, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "What's that?" Julia asked, leaning against his shoulder. "I have been thinking about how lucky I am, how one decision, one choice to ride a different route that day gave me everything. You, our children, this life. Everything good I have ever known came from that moment when I found you." Julia smiled, taking his weathered hand in hers. "I have been thinking the same thing, how falling from that train the worst moment of my life led me to you, to all of this. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Richard had succeeded, where I would be now." "Nowhere good," Nathan said quietly. "And I would be here alone, never knowing what I was missing." "But that is not what happened," Julia said firmly. "You did find me. I did survive. And we built this beautiful life together. That is what matters, not what could have been, but what is." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "You are right, as always. Here is to what is." "To what is," Julia echoed. And they sat together as the sun sank below the horizon. Two people who had beaten impossible odds and come out the other side together, their love a testament to the power of choice and the possibility of redemption. When Julia died at 88, the entire territory mourned. The church in Ashfork could not hold all the people who came to pay their respects: ranchers and cowhands, shopkeepers and teachers, women she had helped and children she had taught. The marshal from Phoenix came, as did the governor, both speaking of Julia's contributions to Arizona and her role in advancing women's rights in the territory. But the eulogy that mattered most came from her granddaughter, who stood at the pulpit and told the story of the train and the snow and the cowboy who refused to ride past a woman in need. "My grandmother taught me that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by what we do next," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. "She taught me that love is a choice you make every day, not a feeling that happens to you. She taught me that strength is not about never falling down, but about getting back up every single time. And she taught me, by the example of her life, that the most powerful thing any of us can do is choose kindness, choose compassion, choose to see the humanity in everyone we meet." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "My grandfather Nathan used to say that finding Grandma Julia in that snow was the luckiest day of his life. But I think they were both lucky. Lucky to find each other, lucky to choose each other, lucky to build a life that proved love wins. Always in the end, love wins." The congregation rose in a standing ovation, and in that moment, Julia's legacy was clear, not just in the ranch she had built or the children she had raised, but in the lives she had touched, the hope she had offered, the proof she provided that even the worst beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. The Xavier Ranch operates to this day, still in the family, still raising cattle in the Arizona high country. The original cabin has been preserved as a historical landmark, and tours are given on weekends in the summer. Visitors walk through the small space where Nathan nursed Julia back to health, where they fell in love, where they started their family. They see Julia's journals behind glass, Nathan's saddle mounted on the wall, photographs of the couple throughout their long lives together, and sometimes, usually women who have survived their own traumas, their own terrible marriages, their own moments of despair, those visitors stand in that cabin and feel something shift inside them. They feel the hope that permeates those old log walls, the love that was built there, the reminder that survival is possible and life after trauma is not just possible, but can be beautiful. The story of Nathan and Julia Xavier has become more than just family history. It has become legend, folklore, a parable told and retold across generations. The details may change in the telling. Sometimes the train is different. Sometimes the injuries more or less severe. Sometimes Richard dies differently, but the core truth remains constant. A man chose to see another person's suffering and refused to look away, and that single choice changed everything. It is a story about many things, about survival and redemption, about love and partnership, about the power of second chances. But perhaps most importantly, it is a story about hope, about the fact that even in our darkest moments, when everything seems lost, there is always the possibility of rescue. Not necessarily from outside forces, but from within ourselves. The possibility that we can choose to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep believing that better days are ahead. Julia chose to keep breathing in that snow, even when dying seemed easier. Nathan chose to investigate, even when riding on would have been simpler. They both made choices, again and again, to build something good from something terrible. And in the end, those choices mattered more than any of the circumstances that brought them together. Their story proves that the worst thing that happens to you does not have to be the last thing, that you can fall from a train and still find your way home. That love, real love, does not fix all your problems or erase all your scars, but it gives you a safe place to heal and someone to walk beside you on the journey. And maybe that is the real miracle, not that Nathan found Julia in the snow, but that they found each other in every moment after that. In the quiet mornings and the hard days, in the celebrations and the sorrows, in all the ordinary moments that make up a life. They found each other again and again, and they chose each other again and again. And that choosing was what transformed a rescue into a love story for the ages. The trains still run through Arizona, cutting through desert and mountain, carrying passengers toward their destinies. The snow still falls in the high country every winter, blanketing the land in white. And the Xavier Ranch still stands, a testament to what two people can build when they refuse to let trauma have the last word. And sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, if you stand on the hill where Nathan and Julia are buried and listen carefully, you can almost hear it, the sound of hoofbeats in the snow, a man's voice calling out that everything will be all right, a woman's whisper of gratitude and hope. The echoes of a rescue that became a redemption, a survival that became a love story, a falling that became, in the end, a kind of flying. Because Julia did fall that day in December of 1877, fell from a train, fell through the air, fell into the snow. But she also fell into Nathan's arms, into his life, into a love that would sustain them both for over half a century. And in falling, she learned the most important lesson of her life, that the landing matters more than the fall, that how you rise is more important than how you fall, and that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. Their story is over now, ended with two graves on a hillside and a family that spans 4 generations. But what they built, the ranch, the love, the legacy continues. And every time someone hears their story and feels a spark of hope, every time a woman in a bad situation remembers that survival is possible, every time someone chooses kindness over convenience, Nathan and Julia Xavier live again. Because that is how the best love stories work, they do not really end. They ripple outward, touching lives they will never know, inspiring choices they will never see, proving again and again that love, real love, is the most powerful force in the universe. Stronger than trains or snow, stronger than cruelty or death, stronger than anything that tries to break it. Nathan found Julia broken in the snow, and together they proved that broken things can be mended, that wounded hearts can heal, and that the worst beginning can lead to the most beautiful ending. That is their gift to all who come after, proof that hope is always warranted, that love is always worth choosing, and that the best response to darkness is to build a light so bright it can never be extinguished. And so the story ends where it began, with snow and survival, with choice and consequence, with one person reaching out to another in their moment of greatest need. But it also ends with something that was not there at the beginning: love, deep and abiding and eternal. The kind of love that makes all the suffering worthwhile, all the struggle meaningful, all the darkness bearable. The kind of love that proves beyond any doubt that even in the coldest winter, spring will come again.